Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Really looking forward to this opportunity to chat with some of my friends about a topic that is dear to my heart. I have with me this morning Harvin Moore. Harvin is an entrepreneur, investor, who today leads Houston Exponential. Houston Exponential is an organization that is working to accelerate innovation, the growth of our technology innovation ecosystem right here in Houston. He also informs me he was part of the company that had the first commercial rocket launch. We may hear a little more about that later today. Stephen Gonzalez, to his left, technology transfer strategist. Stephen and I have known each other for probably close to 20 years. He has 30 years of leading NASA efforts around innovation and engagement with the entrepreneurial community, tremendously active in external connections, making and leveraging that capability and expertise of the commercial and academic sectors, and instrumental, by the way, in the formation of SpaceCom a few years ago. Rick Janay, welcome, Rick. An educator, entrepreneur, and researcher, PhD in astrophysics, actually formed Rocket and Rigs, a cross-industry collaboration forum, and today is leading efforts to foster the commercial ecosystem, space ecosystem in Brownsville, Texas. And finally, Steve Altemus, CEO of Intuitive Machines. If you have not visited the exhibit floor, I encourage you to do so. Intuitive Machines is a great success story in commercial space here in Houston. I welcome you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Vernon.
So I just wanted to kind of set the scene. As hopefully you all know, 2019 was the 50th anniversary of humans landing on the moon. And coming into 2019 and thinking about SpaceCom 2019, I started to reflect on, well, what has that economy, what has that activity meant for Houston in its broadest sense? We know that landing on the moon had a national impact, certainly global, but what did it truly mean for putting Houston on the map for driving developments within the city and within the region? I think if you ask yourself that question, there are some obvious things that might come to mind. Certainly for me, simple things. We have two sports teams, Houston Rockets, Houston Astros. I think those are outcomes of our space focus. I would hope that there are multiple other answers to that question, and I think the panelists will reveal some of those as we go forward. But what can we learn from that historical luck, that legacy luck, to inform us about the future? So if I was asked to ask you the same question in 2069, 50 years from now, what might the answer be? What impact will the next 50 years of the space economy have on Houston? We can ask that question in a passive way, but my preference is that we here in Houston ask the question now, answer it, and be very proactive and deliberative about making sure that we get the outcome that we want. It's not simply a conversation about Houston. I encourage you to think about this analysis in terms of your own community. What lessons can you learn from what Houston has done right? Maybe those things that Houston didn't do quite right, for driving the development of the space economy in your region, your country. This is a global enterprise, and this is meant to be an opportunity to learn from the experience here in Houston specifically. So with that, let me open it up and start the conversation. Maybe I'll start with you, Steve. So just talk to me personally, what has the space industry, the space economy of Houston meant to you?
Well, it's been quite a journey. I think I've been in Houston here for 15 years now, and having served as a NASA civil servant, engineering director and deputy center director at Johnson Space Center, I have an affinity for the Johnson Space Center, for NASA, and for human spaceflight. And as a result of those positions, I've grown very close to the city itself. And now as a commercial entrepreneur with a mission to fly back to the moon, I wouldn't want to do it any other place but in the city of Houston. And I would like to see words spoken in 2021 when the U.S. returns to the moon that says, Houston, Intuitive Machines has landed.
Excellent. So Rick, you have a perspective from afar, not a Houston resident, but I think watching with interest what Houston has experienced in the context of what you can do in Brownsville. Can you kind of talk a little bit about that?
Well, certainly. Well, I think Houston has been synonymous with space exploration for at least my entire life. And it has been an inspiration, its history has been an inspiration for many of us that aspire to somehow be involved in space exploration and development. And I think it's at a very key point right now with the convergence of where we are with technology, a convergence of where we are economically and where we're going as a nation, that Houston is in this great position to kind of be this beacon to lead entrepreneurs and to inspire other regions to explore further. And one of the things that I think one of the big inspirations is what we call New Space City, and taking that inspiration from Space City. Space City Houston it has inspired a community down in South Texas to reach further and envision itself as a major player in space exploration. And this is what's led to the New Space City Brownsville initiative, which we'll definitely talk to more. But no doubt that Houston has played a major role in these efforts.
Stephen, you spend a lot of time visiting communities outside of Houston, talking to them, talking with them about space, about innovation. What are the characteristics of the Houston experience that you find resonate with those communities, with those entrepreneurs?
Yeah, for places like Brownsville and New York City, with Puerto Rico, even Boise, Idaho, it's amazing how they love the fact that we have technology to offer. And Houston has shared our technology, Johnson Space Center, with the Texas Children's Hospital. We were able to work with them in order to be able to allow premature infants as they move from room to room, hospital to hospital. The vibrations that they're subjected to will damage their internal organs, but a lot of times these children will die in the process. And they work with the Johnson Space Center to be able to create a platform that would allow these children to be transported from hospital to hospital without damaging their internal organs. So these other cities see the possibility of seeding and creating new markets with technology from NASA. And each of them have come with their own different spin of capabilities. They look at Houston and they say, well, yeah, we can't replicate that. In New York City, they have a very different combination of skills and industries, but they see the core of being able to bring together a strategy for the community, acceleration programs, the universities, the industries, and creating their own mix that would be work with their community. So they look at Houston, they see what mix we have, see what they can mix with their own capabilities, add their own flavors, take out what doesn't work, and they're doing some amazing things out there.
Yeah, excellent. So Harvin, as an entrepreneur, as someone that is trying to drive innovation in this community, are there things that you take from the space experience over the last 50 years to help your efforts?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to reveal whether I can go back the whole 50-year period, but I'll just say vaguely that my first memory, everyone has space, I think, in the DNA. It's not just everyone in Houston, but really to some extent, I think every human somehow, you look at the images of when we landed on the moon and these images of people in squares and city centers all over the world looking at it because it was a human achievement. And it was an American achievement, but it really was a human achievement. And that's, when you look back at that, if you haven't, Google it and look again, it's quite remarkable and it's important. So yeah, it's in all our DNA. My first vivid memory as a child was when I was 5 years old, just to go ahead and get it out there, in 1969. And my parents had a moon party. And for those of you who are a little bit young, it's kind of like a Super Bowl party, except it's for the first time that humanity ever stepped foot on another world. So it was a party, except that TV is small and it's black and white. So the family, the other people come over, and I guess they're drinking. I don't know, I had gone to bed. So they get me out of bed. My dad takes me, we're looking at all these happy, I guess, drunk people in the living room. They're all in a great mood. And he takes me outside because I don't quite get it, I guess. And he holds me up in his arms, and it's a full moon that night, July the 20th, 1969. And he says that those people on the TV, those astronauts, they're there right now. And that is my first memory. So it's in my DNA. And as you mentioned, I got, the other thing is I got this cool summer job getting out of high school, going into college, where the first commercial launch, it was a Space Services, which is a Houston company, and started by David Hanna, a local entrepreneur, and Deke Slayton, one of the original astronauts. And they were the first commercial launch to outer space, and it was a successful launch in 1982 from Rockport to Matagorda Island, halfway between here and Brownsville. I remember sitting at breakfast with my dad, we're reading the newspaper, and I should say my dad is reading the newspaper, and I'm probably eating Lucky Charms or something. And he said, look at this launch, I was interested in it. He said, maybe you should ask for a job, tell him you'll work for free, which I thought was kind of crazy. I got the job, and so I ended up working on a launch site for the first time that, there's ever been a commercial launch, and it was scrappy. It was not like the way NASA would do it exactly, even though we had some NASA people on board. So these are just a couple of memories that take me back, but I have lots of reflections about how Houston was really a part of that. And then later we can talk about where I think we need to go and how to get there, but there's a lot of potential in this city.
Did you end up working for free?
No, they insisted on paying me, but I'm not going to tell you what the minimum wage was back then.
So, you talked to the iconic, I think, experience that many people around the globe had, associated with the moon landings. But, space, the space endeavor can be connected to social development, economic development, national security, technological superiority. Steve, you want to comment on what you've seen in the fabric of Houston in that regard?
I guess in thinking about it from the past 50 years, Vernon, what was it that sparked Houston as a space city was really, if you think about it, it's where Brownsville is today back in the 60s when we thought about building Johnson Space Center as the manned space flight center. We were building technical facilities, laboratories, we were building test rigs, and we built a community of engineers and scientists and a workforce that was all vested in the outcome of the human spaceflight programs. And we attracted all sorts of talent to this area. And as we move forward, going forward, you see that we've grown generations of talent within the families that initially moved here, and then they went on to study engineering and science and physics and mathematics. And so that regional development based on putting Johnson Space Center here as a hub created this passion in our DNA for space. And so going forward, it's very important that we think about our local community, that we think about how we're going to grow the next generation of engineers, scientists, technicians, where we actually manufacture and fabricate and build the systems that are going to take us out in exploration. I'm very passionate about doing that right here in Houston. We've built this space community, and over the recent history, we've kind of stepped back in a role at Johnson Space Center to be more of program management, manage large programs, and essentially become a service industry around the Johnson Space Center. And what I'd like to see more of is I'd like to see us more on the end of building things and manufacturing things and using our spaceport to do R&D and to bring the new space, emerging commercial companies to Houston to do their work.
Yes, yeah, totally agree. Rick, it sounds like, to make this work requires a lot of ingredients, getting the right mixture. Can you speak to what you are doing in Brownsville to replicate perhaps some of the right mix?
Well, certain. Well, some of the things Steve was talking about fostering the next generation and getting sort of a critical mass of engineers and scientists, and that we're doing several initiatives down there. One of which is actually inspired by what's going on in Houston. And I'm gonna give a shout out to Anita Gale, who I know is in the audience here. She and several others created something known as the Space Settlement Design Tournament, which is this amazing way to get high school students thinking about, or Space Settlement Design Competition, excuse me, she's gonna correct me on that. But this amazing way to get high school students sort of have the experience of working in industry and responding to a proposal and this type of thing. It's kind of like a model UN, but it's focused on space development. And we've been working with the Houston team to actually create a model, something based on that, and bringing that to South Texas. And it's part of our initiative in something known as Expanding Frontiers. It's one of the initiatives we have to help to change the mindset, the local mindset, that they can be, they can work in the space industry, they can be entrepreneurs, they can be the engineers and scientists that are leading the charge. It's just another example of how working with the Houston group has inspired what I think a very remarkable program that we're doing down in South Texas in the Brownsville area.
Yeah, great. Stephen, Houston isn't only about space. A lot of what we see here in the city is based around the energy sector, obviously a tremendous medical center. Can you talk to the connections there? Do you think there was benefit from the investment and commitment to space here in Houston for those other industries that are now well established here in the city?
Absolutely. Like I said before, because of our technology, we're helping premature infants here in Houston. Because of the synergy of challenges between energy, medical, and aerospace, you continue to see all these initiatives launched to try to bring together the best minds to solve problems in each other industries. So you have Pumps and Pipes that's been here for about a dozen years that is bringing together the communities. You had over the years Deep Space, Deep Ocean from Saudi Aramco. You had another initiative called MESS to be able to bring together manufacturing and energy and space. And so now most recently we have Rockets and Rigs down in Brownsville to be able to find the challenges in the rig community and specifically create companies from NASA technology that will address the needs in the rig community. And then hopefully we'll be able to reverse that paradigm and look for technologies from the other side to bring in. So, SpaceCom was created to bring together those 6 different industries. There's so much synergy and so much capability here in Houston that you won't find anywhere else, that I think there's much more that could be done in the future. I think we're just scratching the surface of the capability, and hopefully through some of the things that we're talking about between Houston and Brownsville, we can accelerate that. The one thing I want to add on to what Rick has said earlier, that he is rather humble about, but the thing that Brownsville is amazing, and that one of the things that I think should be an inspiration for Houston also, is how much the whole community is rallying around New Space Brownsville. To see the city, to see the university, to see the business community, to see the students all coming together. Even when we were down there for the launch of New Space, the junior college is anxious to see how they can get together. So I think that when we talk about Houston in the future, when we get to that point, there's lessons to be learned from the New Space communities that we should be able to bring in as we move forward.
Yeah. So Harvin, we've had a federally driven space industry in Houston for the entire 50 plus years. Do you think that's been overwhelmingly positive for innovation in Houston, or is there another interpretation?
Well, I think huge projects like the big one that kicked it off, which of course is the Moon project and the Apollo program, which is kind of all about Houston, right? Because President Kennedy announced it at Rice Stadium, and then the astronauts were trained, and then Lyndon Johnson got the Space Center, built here, and then and then, with mission control and the first word spoken for the moon. You've heard all this stuff before, but I mean, all that's kind of Houston. And it was a gigantic project. Now, it did take an amazing number of people, a huge, and a diverse too. I mean, by the way, I'm sure most of the people in this room have seen, I think it's called Hidden Figures, an incredible movie about all the people that made it happen. And that's what, and we can get back to this later, but we need to really think hard about how to include more communities in the overall project, not just in aerospace, but in all the other types of tech innovation that are going on in Houston, and we've got some of that. So I don't know if we're going to talk about like San Jacinto College and what's going on down there, but it's really, really good. So this is a big project that probably required a huge amount of federal funding and federal oversight and control, and it had to be done right. But now what's happened is that we've still got a real strong federal system. There still is federal funding, even though it's a struggle every year, I know, for NASA. But I think there's enough information out there and enough people who have left NASA and started their own companies. There's enough funders who see revenue streams that now we can start to allow the markets to do their thing. And what I think is exciting just as a citizen is to watch NASA become comfortable with organizations like, Elon Musk and SpaceX, who just do their things their own way, and they're not always easy to get along with, and then the people have to kind of figure out how to get along with them. But I'm really glad that, as an American, really glad to see that happening.
So Steve, I think you've got a pretty unique perspective, being a civil servant for a number of years in the middle of that federally driven program. But now stepping outside, demonstrating, entrepreneurship, successfully building a very vibrant business. So looking back, what was good and what was not so good about the way that we as a community went about space?
Yeah, let's see about that one. I definitely, I think, drawback while I was at the Johnson Space Center, and I was part of it too, was that we had a tendency as a federal institution to draw up inside ourselves, as opposed to building the relationships we needed in the local community and in the local economic development organizations and the local politics to be able to build the city out as Space City, as opposed to building out the Johnson Space Center. And so there were quite a number of initiatives in the recent past to kind of tear down the walls around the federal institution and spread that out into the community and to become a stronger, more forceful voice in space going forward. I think with the advent of commercial space, NASA has a different model for how they procure and acquire goods. And Houston ought to be at the forefront of developing new emerging space, commercial space, because that's the way goods and services will be bought in the future from NASA, from the federal dollars. And so there is this linkage now in the future, which is a great beacon of hope for our community, if we can organize around it, is to attract commercial business here and keep this a space city, but redefine ourselves with an identity that says we're a commercial space hub, and we're building spacecraft and building satellites and building supercomputers and avionics and sensors and putting them into space. What does that take? It takes an R&D hub, it takes a engineering and scientist workforce, it takes money, it takes investment money and financing. And I think if we can imagine what that future might look like, a good example might be what our spaceport Houston is beginning to become as an R&D hub for all technologies around aviation and space. And I think taking advantage of the direction that the federal institution's going and having a hub like Spaceport Houston is the beginning of the next 50 years, I think.
Yeah. So I can see there's a desire across my panelists to talk about the future. So we'll kind of start to pivot a little bit. But Rick, so for a region, a city like Brownsville, presumably you could choose to invest in a whole series of different ways to grow the economy. So why space? What is the value proposition for a space economy in your region?
So there are many ways to look at that and answer that. A lot of it, one part has to do with inspiration and developing the human capital necessary for this. And I originally went to Brownsville 15 years ago as a theoretical astrophysicist, actually. I saw there the opportunity to do what I love to do, because there was a strong group being developed in astronomy down there. And but also I saw the possibility of being able to impact the community at large, because there was an excitement down there, a group of people that, or just the entire community, wanting to look forward and wanting to change and grow. And you could see this even then. And I'm like, this is very exciting. I want to be down here. And through the years, developing various programs that work with high school undergraduate and graduate students and getting them excited about science and technology and engineering, but doing that through space exploration, doing that, searching the galaxy for exotic stars, or understanding instrumentation, radio instrumentation, or even now, developing and building space systems and launch systems and these types of things. So I think one important piece that space offers is that inspiration. The inspiration to think differently and to want to be a part of something bigger than yourself, I think, is an important part of the value of the value proposition. And the other thing, I could go through a whole thing of why Brownsville, why would commercial entrepreneurs want to go to Brownsville and all that kind of stuff. But in the limits of time, I'll just say that Elon Musk decided to come to Brownsville.
Yeah.
So
Stephen, when you look at Houston, do we have the focus? Do we have the commitment? Have we articulated that value proposition?
Great question. So in the risk of being unpopular,
there you go.
Houston, as we say, space is in our DNA. Space has always been in our DNA. Over the years, for the reasons that Steve had mentioned earlier, and also for the city, Houston took space for granted and started forgetting about space. Houston started to focus on the bigger industries that are bringing in the funding, bringing in the larger number of jobs. And so there's been a lull, and there's an opportunity for it to be able to catch back up and to be able to do more things. And it's nice. We're seeing initiatives from the Greater Houston Partnership to look out to see what's possible as far as space and growing the new space economy here. You see things from Houston First, by bringing SpaceCom here to Houston. You see that the community is trying to rally against this, but it's still part of the other industries, what you had asked before, as far as energy, medical, maritime trade, agribusiness, all those other industries that are here, that if we were able to find that spark that brings them all together, that would show what space commerce is all about. SpaceCom was talking about what happens at the intersection of the 6 industries that belong to Houston, as well as what happens at the intersection of the 5 commerce legs that are unique to Houston and unique to Brownsville. Only in Brownsville and Houston do you have commerce through our ports, through the rail system, through the airport system, through the interstate that goes to other countries, and then now through spaceports. You've got the spaceport here, you've got the launch capabilities, and looking forward to a spaceport there in Brownsville also. So Houston has the ingredients, Houston has the capability, I think, and with the new innovation activities, it has all to make it happen. I just think that it needs to figure out what is the strategy for Houston and what's the strategy for hopefully a corridor between our 2 cities.
Yeah. Harvin, anything to add there?
Well, I completely agree with Stephen that to me the story about aerospace in Houston is a story of potential. I mean, to a lot of people, like I said, people do consider Houston to be Space City USA. We think we're Space City USA, and the kind of secret that we don't really want to completely let out yet is there's a lot more potential than there is what's already here right now. But the good news is that we have all of the all of the raw materials, all the ingredients. When you think about it, we've got the big aerospace companies, and we've got NASA, we've got already spin-off organizations, we've got a strong economy, we have a big workforce, great universities, both colleges and universities. We've got like everything you need for this. But there needs to be actually a focus, and frankly, this is one of the things that Houston Exponential, is supposed to help do. Now, I mean, we've got actually several of the priorities we were hearing earlier, artificial intelligence and robotics and machine learning, are all target areas for Houston Exponential, but aerospace is one of them. And as you know or may not know, Houston is a gigantic place, about 7 million people in the area. It has a GDP of over $500 billion. We're the fastest growing city in the top 5 in the United States. We're about to cross in the next 6 to 8 years the size of Chicago. So we have more corporate headquarters than any place but New York. So we have all of the ingredients. Oh, and by the way, no tax, no income taxes, low cost of living. It's an ideal place to start a business in any industry. Yeah, energy is the most famous. That's about 40% of the economy. But aerospace is something that if we work on it as a group, which we will be doing, to try to develop a real cluster out of it. So take the corporates, have them work together with each other, and then try to build, including all the way just to accelerators, in order to really get a lot more startup activity going on around aerospace. This is not just going to happen on its own. It has happened on its own, but it's going to happen a lot more if we help to accelerate it. So much potential. And when I think forward to 50 years, even 15 or 10, it's going to be that's when we're really going to be proud of what's happened here.
Yeah. Steve, we can talk about the aerospace industry, the established players. There are other companies that are starting to disrupt the kind of space industry. But presumably over the next 50 years, we're going to see that broaden substantially. I think there was a reference to a movie, I think it was Ad Astra, where there's a Starbucks and an Applebee's on the moon. So in that context, talk to me about what things might look like 50 years from now, who the players might be, who the dominant companies might be. You look at the stock market and who was dominant 10 years ago versus who is dominant today. It's a very different profile. Any speculation there?
Well, I would say if you look at the current state of big aerospace, call it big aerospace, it has a connotation, and recently possibly a negative connotation in terms of how expensive programs are and how long they take to complete, has really caused some apathy in the general public towards maintaining the funding for space programs. And so what we have a responsibility to do, I think, and where Houston can serve a purpose here, is to foster a culture that provides, like you say, a disruptive business model to big aerospace. And so you can see that the large aerospace companies are terribly frightened of these Silicon Valley type startups that have huge market capitalization as a result of their valuations, right? And so those companies can jump in now and do the kind of research and development of space programs that has historically been the purview of governments. And so you see the Blue Origins, you see the SpaceX, right? But you see Google, you see some other ones like WhatsApp and Snapchat and some of those companies that have multi-billion-dollar valuations trying to do delivery drones or things in autonomous machines in the air that's scaring the pants off of Airbus and Boeing, and because they don't have to make the investment to build their business. They have the market cap, and then they're going to put that money into the things they truly wish to invest in and pursue. So I think you're going to see some of those entrepreneurial names come forward and start to push the commercial space in that direction. And already you're seeing our first return to the moon being much more entrepreneurial than low Earth orbit was, right? And so we did low Earth orbit with big aerospace, federal government, monolithic programs that went to international partners, and international partners then came and helped to develop and put their money in. But commercial space was very little part of that. Now you're seeing we're stepping to the moon with commercial partners first, and NASA turning to business and private funds to develop those infrastructure around the moon. So the key to Houston is going to be to attract financing, VC capital, investment capital, and focus it towards commercial entrepreneurship in space.
Yeah. Rick, what I think has driven a big change in the last 5 to 10 years is the emergence of the public-private partnership and its use by NASA, especially. Is that a model that you're considering in Brownsville? Do you see that as a part of the...
We're definitely, we're definitely looking at public-private partnerships or and private-private partnerships and various different things where we can connect our connect our students and veterans to existing companies as we sort of help foster them to create and inspire them to create their own companies. But something I want to mention that Steve had alluded to is we've been working. We're working with NASA. We're working with the Houston Spaceport, Arturo, who's probably maybe in the audience here, on developing this concept of the Space City, New Space City, Commercial Space Tech Corridor, where we sort of get the stakeholders from both points, from both sides of this, and we sort of create a business roundtable where we start to discuss, all right, what is the what are the strengths that we have across the region, and how do we envision what that corridor is going to look like as commercial space moves forward? Because the other thing we have, being on the east coast or this coast of the Gulf, we have a unique resource that needs to be looked at and understood how we can use that for the next stage of commercial space. And then we have all the talents and resources of the two regions. Not even just beginning to get our toe in the water of what we can do with partnerships with Mexico and an entire nation to our south. That I think, as Marvin was saying, that there's a lot of potential here across this entire corridor, and with the talents that we have here to really, think about, define this, what we want to see in 5 and 10 years. And of course, there's a lot of potential to execute on these plans. So definitely looking forward to that, and hopefully we'll be hearing more about this space tech corridor in the near future.
So Stephen, you've been at NASA for most of your career, and I think you've probably seen an evolution of engagement, different types of engagement with commercial industry over the course of that time. How do you, what's the right mix in the future? That kind of portfolio to build a sustainable economic engine around space, where the federal investment is a piece, but presumably there should be others too.
Yeah, so as I said, we were working with communities around the country. New York City that doesn't have much of a space economy. There's a group out there, New York Space Alliance, that is bringing together their core industries, their fintech. They've got a growing medical community, bringing in their economic development community, bringing in the universities. So I think the essential parts is the universities, economic development organizations from that community, the acceleration and incubation programs that are there, and then also being able to tap into the startups and entrepreneurs in that community. The mix of who takes the lead has been different in each community. In New York, you had an independent. Down in Brownsville, you have University of Texas that took the lead, and then the city jumped on board. In New Mexico, they have something to be launched called New Space New Mexico. So it doesn't have to be that the same party takes the lead in all different communities, but in order to be successful, you need to have everyone all in. And if you don't have the students, if you don't have the economic development, if you don't have startups, if you don't have the business community there, then it will take a lot longer for it to launch, if you will.
So Harvin, if you were king for a day, had that magic wand, You know, what would you do to make sure that Houston delivers on its potential over the next 50 years?
That's a good one. Well, it's the answers to Houston delivering on its potential is going to be collaboration. It's going to be how well we collaborate. And when we have people who have left places, other parts of the country, and moved to Houston, like professionally, where they know what it's like there and they know what it's like here, we often hear, of course, they're all gracious and say something nice about their new home, but that's not what I mean. I'm like, they're very specific about the fact that Houston is more inclusive and collaborative than a lot of the other major cities. And I think that's important. So, you know, one, you could say, well, that's in our DNA. Well, what's funny is it's certainly not in the DNA, because if we're mostly, you know, immigrants to Houston from different places, then it's not DNA, it's something about culture. So I think it's culture. I mean, I believe it's 1.3 million Houstonians were born outside of the United States. So, and it's the most diverse large city, over 1 million in the United States. So, so I feel like collaboration is already our strong point. And when Houston Exponential was created as an independent nonprofit, like, we don't run anything. We don't tell anyone what to do. We don't have any authority, although my board is made up of CEOs of the biggest companies and the big universities, and, you know, the Greater Houston Partnership and so forth. So they all have a part in this what we call the technology ecosystem. But it's about convening people about useful, you know, value-added projects. So there is leadership involved, but it also involves really listening and making sure that you have shared values. And then like I said, in inclusiveness, because we need to be sure that this boom that is happening in, whether it's venture capital or energy or new energy or aerospace or whatever it is, involves lots of different aspects in the community. So the reason I'm excited about, for example, San Jacinto Community College's involvement down at the spaceport is that, and they've proven themselves to be really good at developing programs that allow people for a 2-year degree or just for certifications to up their job skills for job areas where the jobs are. So, I mean, not just here's our course catalog, but they work with industry, right. And in particular, in this case, it's the aerospace industry saying, tell us what you need, what you're short of here in Houston, and we'll make it possible for you to get a certification. If you get one certification at a time, you never have to quit your job, you know, which a lot of people cannot afford to do, and that's one of the reasons why they can't keep moving up. So if you can keep them in the job force, and then hopefully their employer pays for it, but even if it doesn't, if you can make it inexpensive enough, you can upskill yourself in different directions, and really develop our workforce. That's the future that I really hope for.
Yeah, and that's, I think, the kind of impact that we would all hope to have on society at large, right? Okay, so we're almost out of time. So I prefaced this with, okay, 50 years from now, 2069, what is Houston proud of? What does it look like? Each of you get a moment to answer that question. Who would like to go first?
I think I can, I'll quickly say. Well, first off, because we're running out of time, I didn't get a chance to thank you, Vernon, for putting this panel together. And I must say, I am humbled to be on the stage with such an amazing group of people, which I think in many ways are forming the future of space and space exploration. Maybe not necessarily big flashy on the outside, but these guys I know are behind the scenes working really hard in Houston and elsewhere to really make commercial space successful. So it really is an honor to be here with you guys. But I think what Houston is what I'm going to see Houston, and I'll say the entire the tech corridor, the Space City, New Space City, in 50 years, I think what we'll be most proud of is that we played an extremely important role in shaping how Texas leads the world in commercial space exploration and development.
Very good. Gentlemen?
I'd like to see that Houston was the birthplace of human spaceflight, and 50 years from now is the leader and the point of the spear, if you will, for human exploration, both internationally and commercially, out towards Mars and beyond. And I think that's our birthright as Houstonians, and we just need that spark of inspiration in the broader Houston community to take control of that destiny and make it a reality.
Very good.
You question you asked before as far as what company will be here 50 years from now that will be, I don't think it's been created yet. I think that in 2069 we'll have, and I want it to be Houston, that company. And Peter Diamandis says all the time that he believes that the first trillionaire will be made in, for a space, with a space company. I would like to see that first trillionaire to be here in Houston. So I think that the new company and the trillionaire we'll have here, and that Houston will be a hub, an example of what you've seen already, a hub for connecting to all the other agencies to be able to feed technology that will transform the economy here in Houston.
Harvin, you get the last word.
Well, 50 years is so far in the future that I'm not sure if it's quite useless, but we're going to be completely wrong about it. So we will be living on other worlds by then, and exactly in what format and which worlds, we don't know yet. 50 years is a long time, and we'll be able to travel there faster by means we don't yet probably understand, and so forth. But even faster than that, certainly I would say in 10 years, we're going to find out that that the energy industry is going to be completely transformed as, I think, mostly new energy, as it's called now. They don't like to call it clean energy because that implies, well, something else. But in any case, new energy is going to be so much more efficient that I hope that the energy problems of the world are going to be just much, much reduced, and that's going to change life for everyone on the planet. And that's hopefully based in Houston. Energy is, hopefully new energy will be, and we're working on that. Another area, of course, is medical. The kind of advances that are going on in medical and genomics and just in health in general to increase the quality of life and increase health span, not just lifespan, are amazing, and it's almost inconceivable what it'll be like. But again, they're worldwide problems where Houston can be a leader, and I think that's going to change life as well. And then finally, the aerospace, I just want to see the entrepreneurs and startups really are, it's sort of obvious and hackneyed to say that they're the future, but I think what we're doing is we're finding out through startup development organizations and incubators and accelerators, like really almost none of which existed 10 years ago anywhere, and 5 years ago even in Houston, that's going to accelerate things in ways we don't quite understand now. And I think a lot of our future is not going to be based on what huge companies and necessarily government are doing, but much, much more about entrepreneurs, and to create the culture in which entrepreneurs can come up with new market-based ideas and try things and fail and then switch to something else. It's very exciting. So I don't know what it looks like, but it's good.
The final word, thank you. Thank you all, gentlemen. Really appreciate you spending time in the conversation today. Thank you all for listening. And I'll turn it back over to James. Thank you.
Thank you, Vernon.